Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that firearms you legally owned just a few months ago are now banned in your state. If you are a gun owner, this isn't just news. It's a sudden personal shift that could directly affect your rights, your property, and how you plan for safety. The feeling of uncertainty is real, and understanding what changed and why is essential before you make any decisions. Before we go further, I want to ask you a question, and I want your honest opinion in the comments. If one of your legally owned firearms suddenly became illegal due to a Supreme Court decision or state law change, how would you respond? Immediately surrender it, store it differently, or take another precaution? Answer in the comments because your perspective is important and can guide others. Let's break this down carefully. In March 2026, a Supreme Court decision, combined with state-level legislation, resulted in 8 specific types of firearms being prohibited. In my legal analysis, this change is not arbitrary. It is grounded in judicial reasoning that emphasizes public safety concerns and regulatory authority. Courts would likely examine both the scope of the ban and the legal reasoning supporting it, particularly whether it aligns with historical precedent and constitutional protections. Historically, gun regulation in the United States has always walked a fine line between protecting individual rights and ensuring public safety. From the early regulatory frameworks in the 20th century to landmark Supreme Court cases like District of Columbia v. Heller, the legal system has consistently recognized the Second Amendment while also permitting carefully targeted restrictions. In my opinion, the March 2026 rulings reflect this ongoing balance, though the immediate effect on gun owners can feel abrupt and unsettling. The Second Amendment remains central to this discussion. While it guarantees the right to keep and bear arms, courts have consistently recognized that this right is not unlimited. In my legal analysis, restrictions like the recent ban are evaluated under a framework that considers both public interest and the reasonable regulation of certain weapon types. Courts would likely examine the proportionality and necessity of banning these 8 specific firearms, especially considering whether they are commonly used for lawful purposes. Fourth and Fifth Amendment considerations may also come into play, particularly if enforcement requires searches or inspections to confirm compliance. In my opinion, these constitutional protections mean that authorities cannot arbitrarily seize property. Any enforcement action must meet legal standards of reasonableness, and individuals retain the right to due process before facing penalties. The federal versus state legal context is important. While the Supreme Court ruling provides overarching guidance, state legislatures retain the ability to define specifics, including enforcement procedures, deadlines, and penalties. Courts would likely examine how state laws implement the ruling and whether they remain consistent with constitutional protections. Gun owners need to stay aware of both federal and state regulations to ensure full compliance. Real-world impact analysis is crucial. Lawful gun owners may now face difficult decisions, surrendering prohibited firearms, modifying them where legally permissible, or seeking legal guidance on storage and ownership alternatives. In my legal analysis, acting proactively is essential to avoid unintentional violations. Understanding which firearms are affected and the timelines for compliance can prevent legal complications and preserve responsible ownership. Supporters of the ban argue that it prevents high-risk firearms from contributing to public harm, citing statistical evidence and safety considerations. Critics emphasize the disruption to lawful ownership and the potential for overreach. Courts would likely examine both perspectives, balancing individual rights with public safety goals. In my opinion, acknowledging these competing interests is essential for understanding the broader legal and societal context. Comment below. Do you personally own any of the firearms affected by this ban, and how are you planning to respond? Sharing your thoughts helps build a community of informed and responsible gun owners. Now that we've outlined the legal framework and the scope of the March 2026 ban, let's explore what this means for gun owners in practice. In my legal analysis, the first step is awareness. Every owner of the affected firearms must identify exactly which weapons fall under the ban. Courts would likely examine whether owners acted responsibly and in good faith when complying with these restrictions. Practical compliance begins with documentation. Keep records of every firearm you legally own, including serial numbers, purchase dates, and any modifications. This not only ensures that you can demonstrate lawful ownership, but also provides clarity if authorities seek to verify compliance. In my opinion, Transparency and meticulous record-keeping are essential tools for responsible gun owners navigating sudden legal changes. Next, consider storage and security. If the firearms in question are not immediately surrendered or transferred, ensure they are securely stored and inaccessible to unauthorized persons. Courts would likely consider safe storage as a mitigating factor in evaluating any potential non-compliance. In my legal analysis, responsible storage demonstrates diligence and reduces risk both legally and practically. Understanding enforcement procedures is critical. State authorities may establish deadlines, inspection protocols, or voluntary surrender programs. In my opinion, complying promptly with these procedures protects you from legal penalties and demonstrates responsible ownership. Courts would likely examine whether gun owners followed established state procedures when evaluating any enforcement disputes. Non-compliance carries tangible legal risks. Even if you own the firearms lawfully under prior rules, failing to adhere to the ban could result in criminal charges, fines, or other penalties. In my legal analysis, understanding these risks is not about fear. It's about empowering you to act responsibly and within the bounds of the law. Political realities also influence enforcement. Some states may implement the ban rigorously, while others may offer temporary accommodations or extensions. Courts would likely consider legislative intent and practical enforcement challenges when evaluating disputes. In my opinion, staying informed about both local political context and procedural guidance is as important as knowing the legal text itself. Supporters argue that these bans improve public safety by reducing access to high-risk firearms. Critics counter that sudden restrictions disrupt lawful ownership and burden responsible gun owners. Courts would likely weigh these arguments carefully. In my legal analysis, understanding the rationale behind the ban helps you engage constructively, comply responsibly, and anticipate enforcement patterns. Long-term implications are significant. Gun owners should anticipate future legal changes, remain vigilant about Supreme Court rulings, and develop proactive compliance strategies. In my opinion, staying informed, organized, and legally aware is the best way to protect both your rights and your safety in a shifting legal environment. Comment below. How do you plan to handle the firearms affected by this ban? Sharing your strategy can help other viewers understand practical ways to comply responsibly while maintaining safety. Let's take a closer look at how this March 2026 ban might play out in real-life situations. Imagine a lawful gun owner who has owned one of the affected firearms for years, always complying with prior state laws. Suddenly, a notice arrives, or a law enforcement agency begins enforcing the new restrictions. What does that mean for day-to-day life, and how should one respond? In my legal analysis, the first principle is to act responsibly and avoid assumptions. Courts would likely examine whether the owner had prior knowledge of the law, whether they took reasonable steps to comply, and whether any violations were willful. Responsible gun owners should consider contacting legal counsel or a qualified compliance advisor to clarify their obligations. Historically, Supreme Court rulings have often navigated this delicate balance between individual rights and public safety. For example, in cases like Catano v. Massachusetts and District of Columbia v. Heller, the court emphasized that the Second Amendment protects lawful gun ownership while acknowledging the state's power to regulate certain firearms. In my opinion, the March 2026 decision continues this precedent, reinforcing that rights exist alongside responsibility. Enforcement scenarios may vary. Some states might implement voluntary surrender programs, allowing owners to transfer or sell prohibited firearms to licensed dealers. Others might conduct targeted inspections. Courts would likely examine whether authorities acted reasonably and within legal bounds during enforcement actions. In my legal analysis, proactive participation, such as understanding deadlines and procedures, can reduce risk and demonstrate compliance. Real-world impacts also include insurance, storage, and household planning. Gun owners must ensure that firearms are safely stored and clearly separated from unauthorized users, particularly when dealing with prohibited firearms. In my opinion, these precautions are both legally prudent and ethically responsible, showing that ownership is conducted with care and diligence. Supporters of the ban argue that these measures prevent firearms with higher risk potential from contributing to accidents or misuse. Critics argue that responsible owners are penalized for compliance with prior laws. Courts would likely weigh public safety against the rights of law-abiding citizens. In my legal analysis, understanding both perspectives helps you navigate discussions and plan actions thoughtfully. Long-term implications may extend beyond the 8 firearms affected today. The legal landscape is evolving, and future rulings could expand, refine, or clarify what constitutes permissible ownership. Staying informed, consulting reliable legal sources, and maintaining meticulous records will ensure that gun owners remain compliant and protected. Comment below. If your state implements a firearm ban like this, would you immediately comply, seek legal guidance, or adjust your storage and ownership practices? Your insights help create a community of responsible, informed owners. Make sure to subscribe and press the bell icon, because in the next video, we'll explore step-by-step strategies for managing prohibited firearms, including legal, safe, and practical approaches for compliance. Knowledge, preparation, and lawful action are the keys to protecting your rights while staying within the law.